This chapter from the book Karma is called the Bardo Teachings, and it starts on page 65. In my notes here, I'm also going to use some from Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's book on the Bardo, the Interval of Possibility, because it is a very clear and concise book about the Bardo. So Traleg Rinpoche starts out by saying the Bardo teachings are based on the Yogacaran's view, which we discussed last week in the previous chapter. And it has to do with our seventh and eighth consciousnesses, which are subconscious or unconscious. We are not really aware of them. The Yogacarans talked about them because they spent so much time meditating. They started being able to experience it directly. And he also said that these teachings are in the Madhyamaka tradition, which is sometimes called the middle way, and it is middle between nihilism and eternalism. The most famous book on the Bardo was originally translated as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And that stuck with the book in terms of a title. But what it really translates the title into English is Liberation Through Hearing in the Bardo. And the idea of hearing is that this book would be read after a person dies, and it has, you might say, instructions to guide you through the three Bardos. So, to quote Traleg Rinpoche right off the bat on page 65, these teachings, the Bardo teachings on how to die and how to prepare for death in order to appreciate the unfolding of mind's true nature, clear light in the midst of the death process. And Bardo actually simply means gap. And there are a number of Bardos that are not related to death. There is the Bardo between birth and death, which is called the Bardo of life. There's the Bardo of dreaming. There's the Bardo of meditation, and so forth. Now, the three that are going to be talked about here are the Bardo of dying. And this is the process of when your body actually starts to die to the point where the body actually physically dies. And now I'm going to quote from Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche on page 19 of his Bardo book. Through the path of clear light, the nature of mind is recognized to be the Dharmakaya. So this is the best outcome for the Bardo of dying. At the end of it, your mind, the nature of your mind in all its luminous brilliance appears. And if you have practiced Mahamudra meditation, you have a chance to recognize it. And as the Dharmakaya, and you will be liberated. The next is the Bardo of reality. And to quote Rinpoche again here, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, through the path of illusory body, the nature of the second interval is realized to be the Sambhogakaya, the body of complete enjoyment. So this is the Bardo that most of us are familiar with, where you have the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities appearing. and it's all made out of light and so forth. So this is the Sambhogakaya, or the Bardo of reality, sometimes called the Bardo, the Choni Bardo, which is a Tibetan word for Dharmata, which means reality. And I'll get into this in more detail. This is just kind of introduction. Through the path of the Nirmanakaya, Rinpoche continues, the third level is transformed into rebirth as Nirmanakaya. This is the Bardo of becoming, and this is the Bardo where we take physical rebirth, where the person enters a womb and then with the sperm and the egg, if it's going to be a human birth or a mammal birth. And that is the beginning of the rebirth process. So those are the three Bardos: the Bardo of dying, the Bardo of reality, and the Bardo of becoming. So here is a very brief rundown of what the body goes through. The physical body goes through. The Tibetans talk about the 5 elements. And so these 5 elements begin to dissolve progressively. The earth element is the body. The water element is mucus, saliva, and blood, any liquids in the body. The fire element is warmth. The air element is breath. And the space element is the body's cavities. So Traleg Rinpoche, here is a quote from him that sums this up pretty easily. The fire element dissolves and your body loses heat. The water element dissolves and we begin to feel thirsty. The earth element dissolves, making the body rigid. The cavities collapse, and so on. When the wind element dissolves, the body ceases to breathe and the pulse stops. Now, during this time, our consciousness is still active. We have not lost consciousness. And the consciousness is still in the body. So there are 3 mental experiences that occur progressively. And it starts with the process of dissolution. The next is the process of increase or augmentation. And the third is attainment. So dissolution is the beginning of the consciousness shutting down. Your appearances become white, bright white. This is sometimes called the white path. The mind starts losing clarity. And they talk about smoke and fog. But it's not that you see smoke or fog, but that your mind, it's more metaphorical. That just like with smoke and fog, you don't see things as clearly, that our mind is less aware and our clarity gets, what would I say, poorer and poorer. Increase is the next one. And simply, it means that this is increasing the process of death and its appearances. This is called the red path, that visually things become red. And the mind's clarity is worse. It's sporadic, flashing on and off. And the metaphor here is fireflies, which flash on and off. But again, you're not going to see flashes of light or anything that looks like a firefly. It's just that you will have some clarity and then it's gone. It's interesting. My mother had Alzheimer's disease, And that could happen too. Sometimes she could be very clear for a very short period of time, and then it would be back to the confusion of Alzheimer's. So that might be a good metaphor too. The last stage is called attainment. And at this point, everything becomes black. So you start out on the white path, go to the red path, and now here you are on the black path. And at this point, there is no cognition, either inner cognition or outer cognition. Your body senses have ceased to operate. And then at the same time, our mind has, quote, quasi-hallucinatory experiences, unquote, such as being in a smoky fog, then among fireflies, and eventually becoming fuzzy. So this is really talking about the whole process from dissolution to attainment. And it leads to unconsciousness. And when your mind becomes unconscious, not the body, but when your mind becomes unconscious, that is the moment of death of the body. At that moment, what is called the clear light or luminosity appears. This is the nature of your mind that appears. What you're experiencing is your own mind in its purity. Khenpo Rinpoche says this quote comes from 32. You have a cognitive experience, not a sensory one. In quality, it is like the experience of a boundless, clear, cloudless sky. So you are aware, or you have the chance to be aware of this. And sometimes the Tibetan word usal is used, and that usually is translated clear light. And so this is the light of consciousness. This is the light of our mind. Now, if we have thoroughly, this is a quote from Traleg Rinpoche on page 67, if we have thoroughly engaged in meditation and developed a sense of awareness and attentiveness and developed concentration, it will be relatively easy to recognize this light at the time of death. If you haven't done that, you pass out. It's too intense. And the opportunity has been missed. What they talk about here, and some of you I'm sure have heard of this, and in this class in Eau Claire, we've read and discussed some other books on the Bardo, and I'm sure I talked about this there, and that is the mother and the child luminosity or clear light. And what you experience at the time of death is the mother luminosity. When we are alive and practice, and if we're doing our practice correctly, we have a chance to experience the child luminosity, which isn't nearly as strong because it's inhibited by our physical body. But if you have trained yourself to recognize the child luminosity, then when the mother luminosity appears, not only is it not frightening, but it's familiar. And so if you have trained properly, if your mind is stable, when the mother luminosity appears, it's like, oh, yeah. And you merge with it because you recognize it, you're familiar with it. The main practice that I am aware of, that you would do for this experience would be Mahamudra practice. But any deity practice does give you a moment of a chance to experience that child luminosity or that clear light. So recognition leads to Buddhahood. And of course, the reason why these teachings are given is that now is a time to practice and prepare for the dying experience, because none of us will escape. This is something we will all experience. And it's a wonderful opportunity for us to attain liberation, or at least have a much better outcome than our karma would dictate. So if you haven't been liberated at this point, then what will happen is you will enter the next Bardo. And as I said, most people, they're just stunned and they pass out. And when they regain consciousness, then they will be in the next Bardo, the Bardo of reality. And Rinpoche says, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, that even insects experience these Bardos. So the Bardo of reality, the Sanskrit word is dharmata, and the Tibetan word is choni. And the first Bardo is the Dharmakaya, which has no characteristics. It's just this limitless expanse of space and clarity. But now here, the Bardo of reality, the good definition is the true nature of reality, the essence of reality, its completely pure nature. So choni or dharmata contains all the Sambhogagaya deities, contains all the pure realms of all the deities, and so forth. This is the way things actually appear in their purity. And what that means is that they are made out of pure light. There's no solidity to them whatsoever. And they're completely pure. And this is what bodhisattvas that have experienced emptiness, they can experience this dharmata. And when you read biographies of these great beings, you'll find that the deity that they were practicing frequently appears to them and gives them teachings. We, as I said, would usually chant the Mahamudra lineage supplication, and it begins with Dorje Chang or Vajradhara. And then Talopa, and it begins that way because Talopa, through his practice, had Vajradhara appear to him and actually give him teachings. So Vajradhara is in the Sambhogakaya realm, and Talopa was able to receive teachings directly from him because he had reached such a high state of realization. A few weeks ago, I talked about Tara, and again, it begins with Tara, who this Indian practitioner was practicing, and she appeared to him and gave him teachings. I remember his name was Nagi. And so this is the way Vajrayana works, and this is the way it works in the Bardo of Dharmata. And so what also was going to happen is, of course, the person that has died will now have a mental body or a body made out of light. And as a result, the person can go anywhere they want to because it's totally mental. And it will resemble the old body, but it will be free of defects such as hearing loss, vision loss, even a loss of a limb, or arthritis, or whatever, because the actual physical body is gone. You don't have any sense organs, but you resemble your old body because your karma from your previous life is still very, very strong. And it is said that you will go and try to re-enter your body if it's still around, and find you can't, and you will find family members and friends, and maybe even attend things like wakes and funerals and so forth, and try to talk to the people. And of course, they don't. They're not aware of you being there. And it is also said it's very good to speak kindly of the person that has died, because they might be there listening, and you don't want to offend them. You don't want the person that has died to get mad, for instance. So, again, since mind is not material, you can pass through walls. You can go to anywhere you would like. If you think you will be there. And that's actually part of the problem, because an untamed mind is constantly thinking, and the person has no control really over where they're going, and how long they'll stay there before another thought arises and they're somewhere else. So a saying which really makes a lot of sense is being blown about by the winds of karma. And this is our habitual patterns, our mental conditioning, and then the seeds of all our positive and negative actions. And not only our just past life, but all our past lives, all the karma that has not been already burnt up. It is said that the mind is 7 times clearer in the Bardo than in our physical body. So you might say we're getting bombarded by a huge amount of sensory input from our non-existent physical senses. So, as I said, this is where the peaceful and wrathful deities of the Bardo appear. And these deities are arising as Sambhogakaya deities, and they're arising from ourselves. They're arising, the person that sees them, they're coming from them. They're arising from their mind. But they appear to be separate. They are coming from the 8th consciousness. This is the storehouse consciousness that we talked about last week. Traleg Rinpoche calls what is arising hallucinations or projections of our own mind. Quote, if we are able to see these beings as nothing other than projections of our own mind and arising from our own emotional conflicts of jealousy, anger, and so forth, we can avoid giving them a reality of their own. Then it is possible to achieve enlightenment at this point. So the deities will be of different colors, sizes, shapes, and so forth. There'll be all kinds of different colored lights, very bright lights and dim lights. And the bright lights represent the 5 wisdoms, and the dull lights represent the 5 poisons. Passion, aggression, ignorance, jealousy, and pride. And most people feel much more comfortable with the duller colored lights than with the really bright lights. The bright lights scare most people. And then there are also very, very loud, extremely loud noises. Traleg Rinpoche, I think either that or Kempo Carter Rinpoche, said like 1,000,000 times louder than a thunderclap, but sounding like a thunderclap. So if you visualize yourself as a deity, any deity at this point, you are liberated because you have pure vision. But with impure vision, we go follow the dull colored lights and end up being reborn in samsara again. So to go over that again, with pure vision, we see things how they actually appear as these Sambhogakaya deities. With impure visions, we see things like a samsaric being sees things. So here it is deity practice that really helps us get through this very difficult period. It helps the practitioner familiarize themselves with visualizing deities, colored lights, and so forth. And this makes it easier to recognize the deities in the Bardo. So one of the main reasons of doing deity practice is that it prepares us for the Bardo and increases our ability to actually recognize these deities as our own mind and attain liberation. The idea, hopefully, being that you recognize in the Bardo a visualization similar to one that you have been doing with your deity practice. So, to kind of sum this up, these visions are actually just various aspects of our mind and the five wisdoms. The peaceful deities appear first, and then the wrathful ones appear after that if we have not recognized one of those peaceful deities as being our own mind and attaining liberation. The wrathful deities are enlightened beings. They manifest wrathfully for our own benefit, not to punish us or to scare us. And sometimes I have seen wrathful translated as forceful. And that's a good point to remember. These deities they're forceful. Rinpoche was very, what would I say, diplomatic. He was very gentle. He wouldn't just outright say, this is where your hang up is. He would help us, point us to our discovering where our strongest kleshas were and problems and so forth. But these wrathful deities, they're more direct. And the idea of wrath is it's not anger. It's very one-pointed to a very specific, shall we say, problem. For instance, Mahakala is one of the main protectors of the Kagyu, and he is an emanation of Chenrezig, the Bodhisattva of great compassion. And it's just sometimes that we need something a little more forceful than peaceful deities. So if the peaceful deities haven't worked for you, now come the wrathful ones. So if somebody's reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead to the deceased, the guidance given at this point is that they'll tell you to follow the bright light. And which will take you to a pure land. So that pretty much goes through the Bardo of reality or choni or dharmata. The last is the bardo of becoming. So if we haven't recognized the clear light of mind, if we haven't recognized our mind as being one of these Sambhogakaya deities that have appeared, then we enter the next one. And by the way, just to kind of go back, the bardo of Dharmata is scary because of the bright lights, the huge amount of sound, your mind going over, your mental body going to whatever place your mind thinks of and not having control of it, not having a place where you might say you can hide or hole up. There's no home for you to go home to. And so it's very, very frightening for most people. And so now here they come to the third bardo, which leads to rebirth in one of the 6 realms. And Rinpoche made this analogy when you get to this place that, and he was using the analogy of a war a long time ago when you had horses, where the soldiers would be mounted on horses, and so you're in a battle, you're on a horse, your horse throws you, or you get thrown off your horse, and there you are on the ground, and everybody else is on horses. And the first horse that is within your reach without a rider, you jump on. And that's what he said it's like here, that you're really wanting to have a physical body. And the first one that appears, you'll go for it. So at this point, your karma from your old body has been exhausted, and your karma for your new body is starting to appear, and your body, your mental body now will begin to resemble the body that you will be taking physically. So here is where it's really important, or at least as important as in the other 2 bardos, to maintain mental stability so that we don't have to follow our impulses, our urges, and the wind of our karma. And actually, Rinpoche says that this is Traleg Rinpoche. He says, quote, when we die, a lot is left behind, allowing a greater freedom to actually do things. So in this third bardo, the freedom is that with practice, with a stable mind, and with clarity, we can choose who our parents are going to be. And we can, you might say, go against the winds of karma and take a better rebirth than our karma and our habitual pattern would determine. So the process is simply we are attracted to a particular realm based on, again, our urges, our impulses, and our karma. And it will be one that we feel most comfortable in. And then once you're in that realm, you will be attracted to your parents. So if it's humans, it will be a womb birth. And so the point here is to train in this life so that we are able to not go with urges and impulses that arise when we are in this place looking for a womb entrance. So what is said is that maintain the stability and clarity and look for a while, observe possible parents to see what kind of place they live. Are they Dharma practitioners? How are they? How do they treat each other? And so on and so forth. And let go of fear. And so this is what you need to be able to do to choose choose your parents. And then, of course, the aspiration is, which is the very last few lines of the Mahamudra lineage supplication, that may I always be reborn close to the Guru, lifetime after lifetime. So this is where, if you're going to take rebirth, you would want to use that ability.